Parmenides had affirmed that what is one, ungenerated, imperishable, motionless, and spherical. His disciple Zeno defended him by attacking his opponents with paradoxes. But there was a third Eleatic, less well known but equally original, who took Parmenides' theses and reformulated them from top to bottom. Melissus of Samos, admiral and philosopher, corrected Parmenides on a crucial point. What is cannot be a finite sphere, for every limit is a non-being. What is must be infinite. And if it is infinite, it can have neither body nor form. In this lesson we shall examine Melissus's singular defense of Eleatic monism, his arguments against plurality and change, and the mark he left on later atomism. The central philosophical problem of Melissus can be formulated through a fundamental question. How can Eleatic monism be defended with arguments that are more physical and less abstract than those of Parmenides? This question unfolds along two dimensions. The first is the ontological dimension. If what is limited, its limit would be non-being. But non-being does not exist. Therefore, what is must be infinite. This is Melissus's great correction to Parmenides. Infinity replaces Parmenidean sphericity. Parmenides had compared what is to a well-rounded sphere, equal from the center in every direction. But a sphere is finite, it has a limit. And if it has a limit, that limit is either something, and then there is something beyond what is, or nothing, and then the limit is non-being. Both options are inadmissible. What is cannot have a limit. It must be infinite. The second is the methodological dimension. Melissus does not rely on deductive logic alone but on analogies drawn from physical experience. Parmenides had reasoned in a purely abstract manner. He began from logical premises and deduced necessary consequences. Melissus, by contrast, introduces examples taken from the physical world, comparisons with birth and death, with the change of material things. His arguments have a more empirical flavor than those of Parmenides, which earned him Aristotle's criticism, who regarded him as a crude and unrigorous thinker. As for his relation to his master, this is not a betrayal of Eleaticism but a reformulation that draws consequences Parmenides had not foreseen. Melissus does not abandon the master's fundamental theses. What is remains one, ungenerated, imperishable, motionless. But he develops them in a new direction, taking Eleaticism toward a philosophy of infinite being that would have a decisive influence on later atomism. The sources for understanding Melissus's thought are scarce and, for the most part, indirect. As with Parmenides and Zeno, we depend on later authors who quoted or discussed his work. The channels of transmission are fundamentally three. The principal one is Simplicius, the 6th century CE Neoplatonist. In his commentary on Aristotle's Physics, Simplicius preserves verbatim fragments of Melissus's book. There are 10 fragments, most of them brief, yet sufficient to reconstruct the main lines of his thought. Without Simplicius, we would know almost nothing of Melissus. The second source is Aristotle himself, who discusses and criticizes Melissus in both the physics and the metaphysics. Although Aristotle is a hostile source, his references allow a partial reconstruction of the arguments Melissus employed. The third source is Diogenes Laertius, who provides some brief biographical notices, such as his position as an admiral and his victory over the Athenian fleet. The hermeneutical problems are considerable. The state of preservation is highly fragmentary. Only 10 verbatim fragments, most of them just a few lines long. Aristotle does not quote Melissus verbatim but summarizes and refutes his arguments in his own terminology, which may distort their original meaning. Determining the original length and order of Melissus's work is a conjectural task. Moreover, there is an additional problem. Aristotle presents Melissus as a crude thinker given to unrigorous reasoning. This negative assessment has conditioned Melissus's reception for centuries, leading him to be regarded as a minor Eleatic, when in fact his reformulation of monism is among the most original in the school. Melissus lived on Samos, an Ionian island off the coast of Asia Minor, approximately between 470 and 400 BCE. He was a contemporary of the great pluralists, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and the early atomists, Leucippus and Democritus. This chronological coincidence is no accident. Melissus's thought develops in direct polemic with these new cosmologies that, after Parmenides, attempt to explain change and plurality without renouncing reason. The key circumstances of his life reveal a singular figure in the history of philosophy. Melissus was not only a thinker but also a man of action. He was admiral of the Samian fleet and defeated the Athenians in 441 BCE, commanding the island's defense against Pericles' siege. He is the only Presocratic we can be sure exercised successful military command. As for his connection with Elia, the tradition does not explicitly include him in the Eleatic School. We do not know whether he was a direct disciple of Parmenides or encountered Eleaticism through indirect sources. Yet his arguments are unmistakably Eleatic, and his originality consists precisely in reformulating that doctrine from outside the circle closest to the master. The polemical context is essential for understanding his work. Melissus writes against the pluralists. Empedocles had proposed four immutable elements combined by love and strife. Anaxagoras had postulated infinite qualitatively distinct seeds. The atomists had affirmed the existence of indivisible atoms moving in the void. All of them accept change and plurality, and all of them attempt to reconcile these notions with the logical demands of Eleaticism. Melissus replies to all of them. Parmenides remains the only coherent position. Yet his defense of Eleatic monism incorporates new arguments, adapted to the debates of his time. The core thesis of Melissus is that Eleatic monism needs to be reformulated on three key points. Parmenides had established the attributes of what is. It is one, ungenerated, imperishable, motionless, indivisible, and spherical. Melissus accepts nearly all of them, but he corrects the last and draws two consequences Parmenides had not. The first correction is that what is infinite. Parmenides had compared it to a well-rounded sphere, equal from the center in every direction. A sphere is finite, it has a limit. But what is that limit? If the limit is something, then there is something beyond what is, and what is not everything. If the limit is nothing, then the limit is non-being. But non-being does not exist. Either way, the notion of limit is untenable. What is cannot have a limit, it must be infinite. And not only infinite in time, ungenerated and imperishable, as Parmenides had already said, but also infinite in magnitude, infinite in space. The second correction is that what is incorporeal. If what is had a body, it would have parts, an inside and an outside, an up and a down, a density and a thickness. But if it had parts, it would not be truly one. Infinity demands incorporeality. Melissus's what is has no shape, no body, no thickness or density. It is one, infinite, and incorporeal. This idea brings Eleaticism perilously close to a philosophical theology. What is begins to resemble a god. The third correction is methodological. Parmenides reasoned by pure logical deduction, starting from abstract premises and drawing necessary consequences. Melissus, without abandoning logic, introduces analogies from experience. Just as nothing can arise from nothing in the physical world, what is cannot arise from non-being. Just as what changes ceases to be what it was, what is cannot change without ceasing to be. His arguments have a more physical flavor, closer to the observation of the material world. This would earn him Aristotle's criticism, but it would also make his arguments more accessible and persuasive to his contemporaries. The third fragment, preserved by Simplicius, sums up this thesis with precision. Just as it always is, so too in magnitude must it always be infinite. Eternity and infinity are two sides of the same coin. What is has no beginning or end in time, and no beginning or end in space. Melissus's arguments are three, each building on the previous ones to form a deductive chain. The first argument is from eternity. If what is ungenerated, it has no beginning in time. Parmenides had already shown this. Was cannot arise from non-being, for non-being is not. But Melissus goes further. If what is has no beginning in time, it is infinite in time. And if it is infinite in time, it can have no limit in any sense. Every limit is a boundary between being and non-being does not exist. Therefore, what is must also be infinite in magnitude. Temporal infinity entails spatial infinity. It is a step Parmenides did not take, and it transforms the Eleatic doctrine entirely. The second argument is from uniqueness. Suppose there were two beings. If there are two, they must be distinct, and if they are distinct, there must be something that distinguishes them. That something would be a limit between one and the other. But every limit involves non-being. What separates one being from another cannot be being, for then it would be a third being, and so on. It must be non-being. But non-being does not exist. Therefore, there can be no limit between two beings. Therefore, there cannot be two beings. There is only one. It is a demonstration by reductio ad absurdum reminiscent of Zeno's paradoxes, but applied to plurality rather than motion. The third argument is directed against change. If something changes, something ceases to be what it was and something comes to be what it was not. There is a transition from being to non-being and from non-being to being. But non-being is not, and from non-being nothing can arise, nor can anything pass into non-being. Change, therefore, is impossible. What is immutable. There is no transformation, no alteration, no motion. Melissus reinforces Parmenides' thesis here, but with his own emphasis. Whereas Parmenides focused on the logical impossibility of change, Melissus insists that experience itself, rightly interpreted, shows that nothing really changes. What we call change is mere appearance. The implications of Melissus's reformulation affect both the Eleatic doctrine and its subsequent reception. The first implication is the infinity of what is. This is the most decisive correction Melissus introduces with respect to Parmenides. The Parmenidean sphere implied limit, and limit is non-being. By removing all limit, Melissus transforms what is into a reality infinite in time, eternal, and in space, without boundaries, without confines. It is an absolute infinity, leaving nothing outside itself. There is nothing beyond what is, because there is no beyond. The second implication is the conception of what is as incorporeal reality. If what is infinite, it can have no body. Every body has shape, and every shape implies limit. Every body has parts, and parts compromise unity. Melissus's what is has no shape, no thickness, no density. It is one, infinite, and incorporeal. This characterization brings Eleaticism close to a philosophical theology. What is begins to resemble an immutable, eternal, infinite God, filling all things without having a body. It is no accident that some interpreters have seen in Melissus a forerunner of negative theology. The third implication is Aristotle's critique. Aristotle, in the Physics and the Metaphysics, treats Melissus with considerable harshness. He regards him as a crude thinker who confuses the logical with the physical plane, who argues in a clumsy manner, and who draws unjustified conclusions from poorly understood premises. This negative assessment has conditioned Melissus's reception for centuries. Set against the logical elegance of Parmenides and the paradoxical subtlety of Zeno, Melissus has been seen as the lesser Eleatic, the one who did not properly understand the master. Only in the 20th century has his originality begun to be reclaimed. The fourth implication is the influence on atomism. Leucippus and Democritus, the founders of atomism, knew Melissus's work and respond directly to it. They accept his logic. Non-being, the void, is as real as being. But they reject monism. There are infinite atoms, full, indivisible, eternal entities, moving in an infinite void. Atomism is, in a sense, a response to Melissus. It preserves his notion of infinity, but applies it to the plurality of atoms and to the space in which they move. Melissus, without intending it, provided his opponents with the conceptual tools to overcome him. Melissus's work raises several hermeneutical problems that have divided specialists. The first problem is his relation to Parmenides. Was Melissus a creative disciple who developed consequences implicit in Parmenides' poem, or was he a bad reader who took literally what was meant as metaphor? The sphericity of what is in Parmenides is an image of perfection and completeness, not a geometric claim. Melissus takes it at face value, finds it contradictory, and corrects it. Is this a philosophical innovation or a misunderstanding? The answer depends on whether Melissus knew Parmenides' poem directly or only through indirect versions, and on whether his literal reading was a deliberate philosophical strategy. The second problem is the compatibility of infinity and immobility. If what is infinite, should it not have parts? An infinite being seems to imply extension, and extension seems to imply divisibility. And if it is divisible, should it not be capable of motion, at least potentially? The notion of infinity introduced by Melissus seems to stand in tension with the unity and immobility Eleaticism demands. Melissus does not explicitly address this difficulty, and interpreters have debated whether his system is internally coherent. The third problem is the theological drift of Eleaticism. Melissus's what is, infinite, incorporeal, eternal, immutable, 1, bears a striking resemblance to the notion of God in later philosophical theology. Is Melissus a link between Parmenides and the negative theology of the Platonic and Christian traditions? Some interpreters have suggested that the Melissian transformation of Parmenidean being paves the way for the identification of being with the divine. Others regard this reading as anachronistic and hold that Melissus had no theological intentions. The fourth problem is that of reception. Aristotle's negative assessment has weighed like a millstone on Melissus for centuries. But is that assessment fair, or does it rest on a misunderstanding? Aristotle judges Melissus from within his own categories and finds his arguments clumsy. Yet if we read them from within Eleaticism, they can be seen as an ingenious response to problems Parmenides himself had left unresolved. The rehabilitation of Melissus in the 20th century has consisted, to a large extent, in reading him without the Aristotelian filter. The debate over Melissus has been shaped by three readings, ranging from disdain to rehabilitation. The first is that of Aristotle, which is also the foundational critique. Aristotle treats Melissus with a harshness he does not reserve for Parmenides or Zeno. He regards him as a crude thinker, given to clumsy reasoning, who confuses the logical with the physical plane and draws unjustified conclusions. In the Physics, Aristotle dismisses his arguments with a brusqueness that has surprised many interpreters. This negative assessment conditioned Melissus's reception for over 2 millennia. Until the 20th century, Melissus was considered a minor Eleatic, the one who had not properly understood Parmenides. The second reading is that of Owen, who in 1960 reclaimed Melissus as an innovator. For Owen, Melissus is not a bad reader of Parmenides but a philosopher who takes the logical demands of Eleaticism to their ultimate consequences. His correction of the Parmenidean sphere is not an interpretive mistake but a sharpening of the requirements of coherence that Parmenides himself had established. If non-being does not exist, then there can be no limits. If there can be no limits, what is infinite? It is an impeccable conclusion from Eleatic premises. Owen also stresses that Melissus anticipates problems about infinity that would resonate in later philosophy. The third reading is that of Jonathan Barnes, who in 1982 offered a balanced assessment. Barnes acknowledges that Melissus is not a great logician. His arguments are sometimes clumsy, his distinctions lacking in refinement. Yet they have historical and philosophical interest. Above all, his influence on atomism alone justifies his place in the history of thought. Leucippus and Democritus respond directly to Melissus. accepting his logic but rejecting his monism. Without Melissus, atomism would not have taken the shape it did. For Barnes, Melissus is neither an unappreciated genius nor a negligible thinker. He is a relevant link in the Eleatic tradition, deserving to be read attentively and without prejudice. We have reached the end of our study of Melissus of Samos. 3 points to take away. First, the correction of Parmenides. Melissus reformulates Eleatic monism on a crucial point. What is cannot be a finite sphere, for every limit is non-being. It must be infinite. This correction removes every possible objection based on what would lie outside what is. There is no outside, no limit, no boundary. What is everything, and is so infinitely. Second, incorporeal being. If what is infinite, it can have no body, for every body has shape and every shape has a limit. It can have no parts, for parts compromise unity. Melissus's Eleaticism thus becomes a philosophy of incorporeal being, approaching a philosophical theology. What is one, eternal, immutable, infinite, and incorporeal. A characterization that would resonate in the negative theology of the Platonic and Christian traditions. Third, an unexpected legacy. Aristotle scorned him as a crude thinker, and for centuries Melissus was considered the lesser Eleatic. But the atomists took him very seriously. Leucippus and Democritus accepted his logic. Non-being, the void, is as real as being. And they applied it to an infinite plurality of atoms moving in an infinite void. Without Melissus, atomism would not have been what it was. His greatest adversary was also his greatest debtor. Melissus took Eleaticism to infinity. And in that infinity, without intending it, he left room for atoms to be born. For those wishing to pursue Melissus further, the essential starting points begin with the classic editions of the fragments. Deals and Crayons remains the canonical reference for the Greek text. The commented translation by Kirk, Raven, and Schofield provides an excellent gateway to the context. Patricia Curd's Presocratics Reader offers a recent and highly accessible English translation. As for scholarship, Owen, in his essay, Eleatic Questions, of 1960, reclaimed Melissus as an innovator who took the logical demands of Eleaticism to their ultimate consequences. Jonathan Barnes, in The Presocratic Philosophers of 1982, offers a balanced reading that appreciates his influence on atomism. John Palmer, in Parmenides and Presocratic Philosophy of 2009, provides a detailed analysis of Melissus and his relation to Parmenides and the atomist tradition. In the next lesson we shall begin our study of Empedocles of Agrigento, the first pluralist to respond to Parmenides' challenge with his celebrated theory of the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. A cosmology that accepts the eternity and immutability of Eleatic being, but applies it to a plurality of principles governed by two cosmic forces. We hope you join us there. Thank you for your attention. Until next time.